Hey everybody, and welcome back. I want to talk about information and when people get information online, especially from videos. A lot of people, I've noticed this for years. A lot of people are what we call, headline readers. They see a headline, they assume they know what the video talks about or the article talks about, and they make their assumptions on that. And sometimes they don't even take a quick second to just sit back and ask some simple questions like critical thinking. And these are the ones that always claim that they're critical thinkers and that they're not sheep. Yet they follow their leader without asking any questions or doing even just a slight deep dive into something to find out more information before they make a strong opinion on something. So what I'm talking about is two people that are on one of my social feeds um, posted and commented on a video, which I'm going to show you, about construction. And it deals with construction in the GTA, Toronto. And they go right to blaming the Liberals, Trudeau and Mark Carney. And I'm going to ask some simple questions, give you some simple numbers that just took a 2-second Google search to show what their statements are just factually not right. And it shows that they assume what was happening or what is happening here in the GTA represents everywhere in Canada. And it has to do with the federal liberals. So let's take a look at this video, and I'm going to read what they said, and I want to talk about what they said.
New home sales in Toronto just hit a 45-year low. And now the construction industry says that there's 100,000 jobs at risk. I'm not talking about realtors complaining they can't sell homes. This is now becoming a structural freeze of the wider housing industry. Last year, developers sold around 5,000 new homes across the entire GTA. In contrast, a typical year would see 2, sometimes 3 times that amount. December alone saw only 240 new home sales, when the long-term average is more than 1,300. That is how far buyer confidence in pre-construction has fallen. No one wants to roll the dice that the unit they signed for today will be worth less when it gets delivered. And here's the problem. Without pre-sales, developers don't get financing. Without financing, they don't start construction. Without construction, the entire industry grinds to a halt. People don't get paid when they don't go to work. We're already seeing the consequences of this. More than 7,000 units across 28 different projects were canceled last year. That is the highest number on record. At this pace, analysts predict that by 2029, we could see less than 1,000 units completed. Compare that to the roughly 30,000 units that were completed this year. Concrete workers, electricians, framers, HVAC techs, architects, engineers, the people who make the windows, the people that drive the trucks to supply the materials, the quarries, the lumber yards. When construction stops, every one of those industries feels it. And at its peak, home building made up 10% of Ontario's entire economy. It's now under 7 and falling. So what happens next? Do tradespeople shift industries? Do factories slow down or close? Does skilled labor leave the province entirely? You tell me. Is this a temporary reset, or is this the start of something much bigger?
Okay. First things I want to say is just this gentleman, I don't begrudge him on the information he's given because it's all true. Everything he said is true, okay? So housing starts, the construction industry when it comes to residential homes is atrocious here in Ontario and has been going down for a while. 10% of the Ontario economy when it was at its peak is now 7. That's a huge drop. And I remember talking to people how they were concerned how majority of the GDP or the economy here in Ontario was just building condos and homes, which is a concern. You know, you want to diversify, but even 10% is a big number for an industry, but it's still only 10%. But I want to digress to the comments that certain people, and I'm going to say both on the liberals and the conservative side, but I'm sorry, guys, you conservatives, you guys really just go with something and run and just go out to left field. I'm not saying the liberals don't do the same thing, but you guys take first place on this. So, but I'm going to say both sides a little bit on this. Everybody can learn how to just step back and just ask simple questions. But right now, it's you conservatives, and this is what I see all the time. So, the person on my feed who posted the video, when imagine 100,000 people in the construction industry out of work. What did Carneys say? Wow, right to Carney. We'll build at speeds we've never seen before. Actions speak louder than words, and the economy is tanking, and the only party who has been in power, liberals, for the last 10 years, are to blame. When will people open their eyes because it's only getting worse? I would technically agree, but things, first of all, take time. Okay. Now, the GTA, like this gentleman's talking about, he's only talking about the GTA, doesn't represent all of Canada. So we're going to get into those numbers. But there was one response to this, which again, I'm going to just like, it just kind of triggered me a little bit. Blaming everybody else. And there was one comment that this person stated on the video was the liberals are all smoke and mirrors. Right to the liberals. Didn't even take one sentence to not blame them. They will blame Trump and their voter base will wave their elbows in the air. Dude, like, guys, I don't understand. This person is not living in a cave. They are witnessing the same thing we all are, how Trump, the U.S., has waged a tariff war on us. Tariffs hurting our economy, which affects building here in the GTA and all over Canada. Uncertainty, jobs, tariffs on the auto industry, which Ontario's heavily invested in, manufacturing, things like that. That's why people also, another reason why they're not buying. So, yes, this is part of Trump and his responsibility, or not his responsibility, but his faults. Waging a tariff war in Canada, an ally, a neighbor, friends. So, yes, people have a right to blame him. But they're not in reality. It's only the liberals' fault. Because if the conservatives were in, we'd have much better construction, which again, I want to get to. So let's get back to blaming the liberals, because what's going on in Toronto means it's happening everywhere around Canada. A simple Google search. I mean, just type in housing starts in Canada compared by provinces. Alberta continued to break records in 2025 and early 2026, leading the country in housing starts per capita due to massive population influx. Okay? It's not like they're doing anything different than the rest of Canada. They have a massive population influx, which drives housing, supply and demands. Now, they are also, there's a recent story where a lot of trades are now leaving Alberta and going to BC. And I want to show you why. One reason is cost of oil has come down, even though they took out a lot of it out of the ground and exported it, or sorry, exported, yeah. Their housing starts, even though they're still breaking records, are coming down. So they don't need as many trades. So they're going to where the work is, which is British Columbia. British Columbia has experienced a 37% surge in actual starts in January of 2026, driven by higher multi-unit projects. So now there's a demand in BC, and that's where the trades are going. Okay. Now, Ontario and Quebec are in the toilet to a certain degree, with January of 2026 data indicating a 30,000 unit drop compared to previous trends. Major cities like Toronto saw significant slowdowns, 2% in January, on pace for 30-year lows, like this gentleman's talking about. Quebec Same thing, significant decrease in early 2026, which starts down by 21,000 units in January. There's just a population shift, okay? Now, when things get better, hopefully a Kuzma deal with Trump, which we're not holding our breath. There'll be stability, and then there'll be housing starts again in Quebec and Ontario because they're major financial drivers in Canada. But they don't represent Canada. Again, simple Google search can show that what they're implying, these two, is not correct. Because if it's let's pretend it's Carney's fault, okay? That the housing starts and construction is being hurt by him or lack of action. Then does he not get credit in Alberta and in BC, where they've got huge amounts of housing starts and the trades are going crazy in BC, even though still in Alberta as well? So if you're going to give him crap for Ontario, you should be giving him credit for Alberta and British Columbia. But that's another thing too, is people are so blinded by a hate of a party, they can't just sit there and think that, is Mark Carney actually responsible for it? Again, I've stated this before. Housing is a provincial matter. Housing is provincial and municipality and city, okay? You could say Toronto charges too much for their fees, they're too much on their building codes, whatever. You can make excuses for it. You know, too much red tape and everything else. But that's not Mark Carney's fault. That's provincial and municipality. And then, does everybody remember Doug Ford saying, I'm going to cut all this red tape and we're going to be having a housing boom like we've never seen before? Still trending down. So if you're going to blame these two, if you're going to blame anybody, you should be blaming Doug Ford's. And of course, the cities and everything else. Now, one other thing I want to point out too, which is a great example of diversification. This gentleman was talking about 10% of the economy in Ontario was housing. And now we've gone down 3% to 7%. And it's people feel like it's hurting and it's hurting the economy. That's only a 3% difference. If you want to look at the numbers, that could be a lot, but 3%, I don't know. We have discussions if it's big or not. Now, I've always talked about this. Alberta, they have their oil sands, which is a driver for their economy in a lot of Canada. 20%, I think it's just over 20%, 21% of their economy is driven by oil sands. That's more than 10%. That's a fifth of their economy's oil sands. And when the cost of oil goes down, just like when there's no demand for building homes, it affects the economy. So, like Ontario should be doing diversification, not just relying on construction as a driving force for Ontario economy. Alberta should be doing the same thing with oil. Yes, except for what's going on in the world right now with Iran, whatever strait that is, cutting off 20% of the oil supply for the world and everything else. Even when those things were not an issue, where people like the U.S. wasn't at war with Iran, oil was flowing. The cost of oil was also still coming down, which caused Alberta to have a deficit in their budget, even though they were producing more oil than ever. Diversification. But do these two ever talk about that? Never. Because and this is my point is, I'm not physically picking on these two like directly. I'm just talking about the overall thoughts of why people happen to always have to blame a party or a person and not really looking into the overall picture, the nuance of an issue, where it's only criticize everybody else and not your own. I've never seen these two individuals ever criticize their own party. To me, This one person was talking about, made the comments of, he made a comment of, in his comment, it's actually quite scary watching all the people in Canada just marching along into the slaughterhouse, indicating we're sheeple. We're sheep. We don't pay attention to what's going on when they're the ones who are not actually paying attention to the issues. That they're calling us cultists or sheep or whatever, that we don't have a mind of our own to think. When again, they're not doing it either. If you can't condemn your own party, you're also a sheep. Your party, your team, whatever you want to call it, can also make mistakes. But if you're finding that you're only criticizing the other side, and everybody can criticize anybody, it's you have to have proper justification for your criticisms. There's no justifications on these criticisms right here because they don't make sense. It's not Mark Carney's fault for what's going on here in Toronto. Yet they're blaming him. You could have a lot of criticisms on Trudeau and what he did, and I'll be happy to go along with you on that. But they have to be justified. Same thing with Mark Carney. I don't want to hear about WEF. I don't want to hear about Brookfield. I don't want to hear that. That's just like nonsense because it's just noise. Because you guys just say those words, but you don't show any proof. Bring the receipts to the table when you have an argument like that. Just, again, please just take a step back and think about it before you try to blame somebody when it's not their fault, because then they can't take you serious. Anyways, guys, I just wanted to share this with you. I wish we all could do better instead of blaming one another and getting on the keyboard and saying all your fault is somebody else's fault or all your struggles is somebody else's fault. It doesn't solve anything. I've never seen solutions or ideas also too when people make complaints. You can complain, you can criticize, but try to also say, maybe if we tried this, this would help. I think we'd be better off as a society if we can have a discussion like that. And then I think we would be happier too, less stressed. But let's see if we can do better. Be nice to each other, and don't take offense when someone says you're wrong, just like these two are wrong. And I've got receipts to show them why they're wrong, and I hope they do better next time. Anyways, guys, that's it for me. Take care. We'll talk later.